I went with Sean on his first mission trip. In fact, Sean and I went on our first mission trip with the church, together. And what I remember about Sean was some real deep questions coming out. For a lot of folks, it's a trip, it's a chance to get away from mom and dad. For some people, it's a real affecting experience. And this is one of those situations where the support and the funding that the congregation provides to the youth mission trips pays dividends. Because Sean has now taken this, and I remember him in the senior year, if you don't mind me telling tales out of school, and saying, I'm still thinking about that first mission trip. So 4 years later, he was still affected by that first mission trip.
I'm a senior at Iowa State University this year. I'm also the recipient of the 2012 Peacemakers Award, which I have to say thank you for because it was a phenomenal gift that made this experience possible for me. A little bit of background, I'm double majoring, so I'm pursuing 2 different degrees at Iowa State University. My first one is in Global Resource Systems, which essentially is international development. So it's very broad, and we're required to have an area of emphasis, and mine is in nutrition, specifically health policy. So I came across this opportunity to go to Panama and work with UNICEF and the Ministry of Agricultural Development, the type of financial resources to make that possible. So McAllister Plymouth was able to step in and help me out with this. So I went in a team. So Brian Castro is the other Iowa State student that I went to Panama with. We went there to conduct research. We were continuing a research project that him and I formulated and then initiated in Uganda in 2011. And this research is based on assessing the impact of health systems on the nutritional status of children. So what we were trying to do was compare our data from Uganda in 2011 and collect the same data in 2012 in Panama, comparing 2 countries that are in different realms of development. Uganda is significantly more failed, as they say, compared to Panama, which is significantly more developed, but still a developing country. So we went there, we paired with, she was a local politician that also worked with MEDA. She was one of our main contacts in the country that introduced us to communities. Yeah, that's kind of the introduction to why we went. So here is the United States, Minnesota's up here, and we flew to Panama, which is down here. Yeah, it's a part of Central America. It's got the 3rd largest GDP in all of Latin America.
What is it?
Gross domestic product.
Oh.
Yeah. So their total revenue as a country is the 3rd highest, but it's also the most unequal country in the Western Hemisphere. So they have wealth that rivals New York, LA, Boston, but they also have poverty, which is worse, or just as bad, if not worse, as Sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a country that has a lot of problems, even though it has the wealth to deal with it. And a lot of that comes from the Panama Canal. So this is a close-up view of the whole country. We have Colombia over here and Ecuador on the western border. The Panama Canal is right here. I flew into Panama City, and I spent my whole trip in the western half of Panama. The eastern half is known as significantly, there's not a lot of infrastructure, there's malaria, there's a lot of other health issues that we decided would make it hard for us to make a lot of improvements and collect effective data just because there weren't the roads, we didn't have any contacts, and it's very mountainous. So we spent most of our time in the western half where there was more of a network that we could use to access the different various rural communities where we were going to collect our data. So here's a close-up view of the western half of Panama. I was based in the Veraguas province out of Santiago, which is right here. I would spend my weekends in Santiago where I would, with Brian and other MEDA, which is the Ministry of Agricultural Development in Panama, we would work with them on the weekends to kind of decompress our data and formulate our plan for the next week. Each week, during the 5 days, we would spend in the rural communities. We spent time in 11 different communities in 6 provinces. So on Monday, we'd load up the car and drive out into the jungle and live basically with the community. We would live in their bamboo huts or in the mud. However they lived, we lived. We'd only bring a cot with us, which was really cool because we not only got to collect our data, but we also got to live as they lived and understand the issues that they were going through. Even though we weren't spending a lot of time in one community, we were kind of getting a whole perspective of the western half of the country, more or less. So this is kind of a run through the significant partners in the experience. This is Dr. Carlos Renaza. He was the ranking veterinarian. And he was in charge of the UNICEF component of the experience. UNICEF was funding goats. They were providing goats for us to bring to these different communities in the hopes of improving the nutritional status of the kids there. The kids would drink the milk or eat the meat, and that would hopefully boost their nutritional status. He was the main guy behind that. He was the one that was talking with UNICEF, coordinating grants, choosing the communities, vetting the different stakeholders and project recipients. So he was also the guy that Brian and I stayed with on the weekends when we would go back to Santiago. His mother, who was God bless her, 95 years old, she threw our laundry. Took us man. So he became not only our colleague but also a very good friend. And I still get Facebook messages from him. These are different community extension workers that we work closely with from the Ministry of Agricultural Development and an NGO, a non-governmental organization called Familias Unidas, which is United Families. And they focus mainly on distributing agricultural inputs in these communities, so seed, fertilizer, plows, and knowledge. So when the goats would be dropped off in these communities, the idea wasn't just to drop them off and leave, it was to kind of leave them with some sort of technical skills. So you get a goat, but you also get seeds that you can plant, fertilizer to nourish the seeds, and then knowledge about how to harvest. So it's it was a goat project, but it was an all-encompassing. So here's a few more workers. These are very, very highly intelligent individuals that usually came from the upper echelons of the wealth status in Panama and recognized that there was a big inequality. So they're often highly educated. She was actually educated, I think, at Harvard or Yale. And she came back to Panama to work in development, which was really cool. So there's kind of this big movement in Panama towards trying to bring up the wealth and status of the lower income level. We also worked heavily with the Peace Corps when we were there. This is Kendra Allen. She is a Peace Corps volunteer in Panama right now. We actually stayed with her. She also was working with the Ministry of Agricultural Development on their project. So she was a middleman. She helped interpret a lot of the language. Brian Castro is fluent in Spanish, but the Panamanian Spanish is different than the Mexican Spanish he knows. So there's a lot of miscommunication going on often, and she was kind of the middleman on that, which was great. She helped us smooth out a lot of that. This is the first community we went to. We spent a lot of time with the children there, where we were trying to understand their nutritional status. So instead of just taking measurements, we'd often spend whole afternoons just hanging out with them and trying to understand, not the way they think, but the way that they perceive their own health status, what they think that they need, so what their education level is as well. So this was the first day, and we're very, very shy. This is a pretty common site. There were no vehicles in the rural communities. You could only really get anywhere by foot or on horseback, since it was very mountainous and it rained a lot. It was winter when we were there, so it was the rainy season. I think he has cookies in his hand, which brings up another point that we found, which was remarkable there, that obesity is actually a huge issue. 90% of the country is overweight, which is more than us. And this would strike you as not what you would think originally on the surface, but it's all micronutrient deficiencies. They eat a lot of carbs, a lot of sugar, and a lot of protein, which puts on a lot of weight, but they're deficient in basic nutrients like iron, zinc. So they're all very stunted in growth. They have bowed legs, different types of deficiencies. They have bellies, so they have the swollen bellies. Some of them are protein deficient. And the food system is skewed in the sense that treats and cookies are what easily is accessible in the rural communities. So instead of eating a nutritious diet with beans and rice and vegetables, they're eating cookies and soda pop all the time because that's what's cheap.
Oh, okay, you just say that's what's cheap.
That's what's cheap.
It just surprised me that that's what's available with it.
Good.
Did you see anything similar in Uganda? You said there's a comparison between.
Well, a comparison would be that Ugandans had access to none of that. They were eating rice. So the kids were micronutrient and macronutrient deficient, which means that they're not only were they not getting the necessary carbs, rice, protein, like the staple nutrients, but they also weren't getting the micronutrients like zinc and iron. So they were malnourished in every sense of the word. These kids were just suffering from smaller deficiencies that would come up in the way that their bones would form, or their eyesight. They're blind kids, vitamin A deficiency. So I had to kind of dig a little bit to find it.
Is this boy suffering from something that you could tell from the photo? Or?
You know, I can't remember him specifically, but it's the fact that he went to the store to buy a package of cookies that brought up that point, I think. So goats were our main focus. So this is what a typical goat would look like. They're everywhere. I actually, when I was in Uganda, I didn't grow. I have a distaste for goats. Being in Uganda, they're everywhere, and they would kind of infiltrate your sleeping quarters and just find you. It's kind of ironic I work with them, but
Don't they eat everything?
yeah, they my socks, everything. So, but they're a fantastic way to help improve the nutrition of children. So I have to set aside my bias. So this is still Santa Catalina. These are the children there. They're very energetic, and they love to play football, soccer. We played sports with them a lot, and like I said, we spent a lot of time with them. And these kids actually, surprisingly, when I was in Uganda, the kids there knew about MTV, they knew about Kanye West, Jay-Z, Tupac. They knew about all those American social figures, but these kids didn't, which I thought was interesting. They didn't really have access to that type of social entertainment. So they weren't as concerned with making money in life. They were more concerned with farming the land that their fathers had farmed, which is an interesting comparison because you'd think that they wouldn't have access. They would have more access to that than the Ugandan kids. But that actually has a huge impact on where a kid goes. These kids subsequently didn't have a drive to really stay in school, whereas the Ugandans did because they wanted to make money and they wanted to be on MTV and those other.
Was there a difference in terms of, between countries in terms of the availability of, say, internet or ways that they would find out these things that they didn't know in Canada?
Yeah, everybody in Uganda has a cell phone, which provides access to the internet or access to friends that have the internet. And in Panama, you had to be wealthy to have a cell phone, but if you had a cell phone, it was usually a BlackBerry or an iPhone. So nobody in this community had internet or cell phones. There was one TV in the whole community, and it played Spanish language sitcoms. So this is in a different community that we went to. This photo is significant because they're growing snails down here for mass production to sell to the market. They have rice growing over there. They have tilapia, and this is a goat house right there. That's what the goats would stay in. That we spent a lot of time helping build. And as you can see right here, this is our driver, Carlos. We spent a lot of time driving with him, and you can see that he's got the belly going on. But he was suffering from several micronutrient deficiencies at the same time. And he didn't come from a very poor household. So that kind of shows what was true for a lot of the population there.
What's the market for the snails?
This is a new project that MEDA is implementing. They don't really know what the market, how the market will respond to that, but it's a good source of food nonetheless.
Is that water just rainwater, or is there a river?
It's irrigated, so they're pumping in. You can see pipes over here that it's being pumped into. There's actually the Interamericana, which is the main highway in Panama. It goes all the way from Colombia up through to Mexico. It goes up through Central America. It actually is just over this bridge right there. So there's a lot of irrigation that comes through.
So what prevents them from growing vegetables, or like spinach and
They do.
lettuce? Because that would give them the zinc and the iron.
It would, yeah. Tropical soil is it's difficult to grow to mass produce agriculturally. There's a lot of leaching. The nutrients in the soil have been depleted because of a lot of chemical processes that I don't fully understand that I can try to explain. But the soil just isn't that. The capacity of the soil isn't that great for mass production at least. But off to the side, you can see that they are growing. I think they have cabbage growing over here. They have rice. They grow potatoes and carrots too. But also, there's a huge disconnect between knowledge about what is healthy to eat and what they want to eat. Because they want to eat the cookies and they want to eat the tasty foods. They don't want to eat carrots.
One of my favorite pictures from your journey was pouring out rain, mud, and you're playing soccer with the kids. And I'm just wondering, without the exposure, I'm thinking those kids slide back. Without exposure to mass media, via the internet, television, video games, what's the nature of their play? So what do they play at without influence of popular culture?
You'd be surprised. It's very. They still read. These kids still read books. So a couple of them had read Harry Potter,
Okay.
and they would play games kind of related to that. They had imaginations. They definitely, and then they've also been told stories from their ancestors about. Like there's this one myth about this white woman that walks through the forest at a certain time of night each month. And like you're not supposed to let your kids out at night because she might take them and claim them.
Scary white people.
Well, not to be funny, but it's a woman clothed in a white robe, and she can walk on water. And people are very, very religious here, extremely religious. So that plays into some sort of offshoot of Catholicism.
John, what is their religion?
We actually came into contact with a lot of Catholics and evangelicals, and this is a point that I was going to bring up later, that a lot of these communities were split half and half, and they would fight. There's a lot of fighting. So another component of what we did was we tried to do mediating between the two groups, because development is impossible if people can't get along. So the idea is to kind of reconcile their differences, appoint some sort of leader from both groups to work together, so we can implement these projects, because if they can't work together, these projects will fail. So we spent a lot of time trying to sit people down, get them to talk. And these feuds go back decades. So an evangelical killed a Catholic then killed all the goats, and evangelical, and it just goes from there. There's a picture of a goat.
Did you bring those to the villages?
Yeah, I have a couple slides coming up that explain how we would go to these goat farmers on the Costa Rican border who would grow the goats. They would receive the goats from the UNICEF shipments, and they would nourish them until they were reproductive age, and then we pick them up and then distribute them throughout Panama. So, let's see if we can get those slides. So this was a port that we would go to sometimes in our free time. nothing too significant about it, but I thought the photo was cool because there was always a rainstorm on the horizon. So we always kind of worried that it could be rained out. And this is Dr. Carlos Fernandez. He was notorious for sitting down and spitting his knowledge. He'd always have an opinion on life. So I really like this photo because the storm's kind of like coming out of his mouth. He's always got something to say. He was a 2-pack-a-day smoker, so he was living a death sentence pretty much. But this is what our truck would look like when we were heading out to the communities. We'd load up with food, water, and our bags. We'd often bring enough rice and chicken to feed the whole community. We sponsored a workshop one day when we were there, where everybody, we'd cook the food and everybody would get to eat, which is, I don't know, always a nice gesture, I thought. But we had to somehow get all of this through the mountain passes. So,
Was there any hesitance about chicken and rice on their part, as far as?
no.
So it was like attractive. to them?
Yeah, chicken is a staple food over there. I have pictures of slaughtering chicken in a little bit. But
Sean, is there any water available locally, or does it all have to be brought in?
it's local water, which was a point of concern for me because, us drinking the water is not a good thing. Could have really gotten sick. So we bring most of our water in each week, but we would never bring enough. So by about Thursday, we'd be running out, and we'd have to decide if we're going to start boiling water or if we're going to brave it.
And of course, there are no treatment plants.
No.
So was it made from like biological, like sewage, or from pesticides or something?
It varied. One of the communities we went to, a lot of the a couple kids had died from drinking the water, and that was because there was a huge production plant nearby that was dumping chemicals. So one of their main concerns was like, they were asking us, why are you bringing goats? We don't want goats. We want clean water.
Sean, is that one of the reasons why there's so much soda that people drink?
That could play into it definitely because they're worried about drinking the water, and the soda's been treated with the water in it.
And now a hydrology question. Are they looking at surface water, or is it wells?
They have both. So Panama, like I said, it was a rainy season, so there were streams everywhere. I was stepping over streams whenever I went, so people would just collect water in the street or in the community, but they also had wells. In one of the photos coming up, actually maybe it's another one. No. Yeah, going through the mountain passes was rough. We'd always get stuck and have to recruit community workers to help push us out.
Somebody's taking photos and not pushing, of course.
Yeah, well, they told me I was white and I didn't have the right string, so that's fine. But as you can see here, these are two huge water holding tanks that were built by a German NGO that came in the year before into this community, which is the La Grama community. And this just shows the huge disconnect in development. These people didn't want the water tanks, they didn't ask for them. It was a $25,000 project that the German NGO sponsored, came in, built them in 3 days and left. And they don't use them anymore, they don't need them. The water there is fine in this community. So this NGO wasted $25,000 building this when they didn't even ask the community what they needed. So what we tried to focus on, like I said before, is just listening to what the kids were talking about, listening to what the needs of the community were. At the same time, trying to collect some data. But we're trying to stay away from telling them what the right thing to do was. We wanted to listen to what their concerns were first, and then suggest from our knowledge and training what would be a good approach to addressing that. But like as you can see, this community, we were bringing a bunch of maize seed input, and they told us they didn't want maize. They didn't want to grow corn. They wanted to grow bananas. So these are banana stubs that we brought instead that they will now plant, harvest, and sell to the market.
I just wonder how much that approach is used in the missionary work, because I've heard of similar problems elsewhere.
It's
Where
horrendous.
all this money and stuff is brought in, and they're like, same thing, we don't need water.
Haiti is actually used now in my global resource systems major. Haiti is used as kind of a case study now about the wrong way to go about development. So after the earthquake in Haiti, all these NGOs flooded in there trying to do work. but it oftentimes just gets in the way. It wastes a lot of money, wastes a lot of donor money, and no progress was ever really made. Like these water tanks are in the waste, they're probably gonna cut them up and use them for something more practical, like jugs or something. But this is a photo of the children that we spent a lot of time with. Another photo illustrating how hard it was just doing anything, going anywhere. We would, sometimes a community, we'd be based out of a community and we'd have to go reach a household that was deeper in the mountains to interview them. And it was maybe a 2 or 3 mile hike, or it should have been, but it would take us 5 or 6 hours to get there because of the amount of terrain that we had to slosh through. This is just a couple more photos showing it. Here's Dr. Bernazza, the 2-pack-a-day smoker, puffing and outside. So we were further away from the canal. We were close to Costa Rica.
Yeah, I'm just discovering that malaria spread across the United States with agrarian development historically. So you were mentioning malaria in the southern part of Panama. How are they preventing it here? And the more they irrigate their land, they may be more vulnerable to it, or what are they doing?
It's not entirely known why malaria hasn't been produced in the western part of the country, but it's thought to be because the mosquitoes can't cross the canal. There hasn't been a documented case of malaria in the western half of Panama in several decades, but in the east, just the other day, there was a health worker that got malaria I heard about. There's just some more photos. We'd often recruit a kid to be our guide going to the community, so he always had the forest. And then we'd all pump our way through the forest by doing it. So this is kind of what the interview process would look like. This guy was in Lagrana. He was way out in the rural communities. He had built this whole structure by himself. He had a wife and a kid. He's 21 years old. Kid is 4. He's probably on track to have 5 or 6 more, which is about the average family size in Panama. So I'm working with Dr. Renaza to translate kind of what his ability is to feed kids a nutritional diet. It's kind of the basis of my socioeconomic questionnaire was aimed at. So that's.
Is he living all alone, his family all alone there, or is there like a little village, or he's like, they're isolated?
They're pretty isolated. They're surrounded by farm plots, more or less. So he either works on the farm plot, he's being hired by somebody else, or he owns a small patch himself. And it's easier for him to just live out there by his farm field than to live in the community and have to hike up there every day.
Is the guy with the blonde hair, he's a native?
This guy, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm wearing a hat.
Always bad with
Sean, is birth control available to the people?
No.
There's no.
And condoms are viewed as the devil's work. So it's not, there's no family planning. Most women have between 7 and 8 kids, and often work to get that. So, yeah. They're trying to start a new, media's trying to push the Ministry of Health to start providing birth control, but with these huge religious tensions that have going on in the community, it makes it nearly impossible. They're focused more on just reconciling those, that conflict than pushing birth control in there. It's not too different than what's going on here.
Sean, what is that structure we're looking at?
So that's actually a goat house. You can see his actual his hut that he lives in over here. But this is where the goats are stored. So the goats actually, there's a lot of input that goes into keeping a goat. You have to build the structure, you have to feed them every day, you don't have to take them out to walk, but you have to keep them moving so that they don't sit there and rot. So there's a lot of upkeep that goes into keeping control of the goats.
So everything is very labor intensive.
Yeah, very labor intensive.
I imagine goats poop a lot.
Yeah.
Do they use the poop as fertilizer?
They do.
At all?
Yeah. So if you remember the photo I had with the rice fields and the tilapia, you can see the goat in the background, the goat house. It was raised off the ground.
Oh, okay.
So the goats would poop through these slits in the floor, and they would collect it, and they would mash it up, and then use it for fertilizer fields. So this is just another picture of a family that we interviewed and worked with. His name is Aldo. He's 21 years old. She was 17. They had 7 kids. So it's kind of a
That's their family?
Yeah. It's typical. I think this is actually her sister. It's living with the rest of them. 17.
Is that one family?
Yeah.
And is there a tendency then to more large families?
Yeah, I mean, they want the large families that help work the land.
Then they need people to work.
Yeah. It pays off, I guess.
They look happy. Is this, I mean, is this a good assessment or?
Yeah,
Or is it
they
just
enjoy
fun?
having visitors. People there are very, they like to provide for visitors, especially one with white skin, as bad as that sounds. But they would always provide a meal. They would want to sit down and talk and hear about your family and how you're doing, even though they don't know you, which is really cool. So going in there with my Western mindset, I'm like, okay, the interviews will take an hour. I'll maybe take anthropogenic measurements and be out in 2 hours. I'll be done on the next household. It would often take me a whole day just for one. I was trying to get 120 interviews when I was there, and I think I walked away with 30. But it's a give and take.
How long were you there again?
I was 2 months. But I learned a lot about people, so I didn't get much data. People.
But that's really important. I mean, if you
Yeah.
come in and just get data and walk away, people feel just fascinated.
Yeah.
It's like, "Hey, all he wants is information from me." So-
Well, more than that, I understand the community more than their needs. So instead of walking away with what helps me, I can provide recommendations that will help them. I'm currently in the process of writing up a report for UNICEF about my internship and like my recommendations for improvement. So this is just another community, another family that we work with. Some more photos of the kids.
Question about the goats. Did they slaughter the goats for meat, or did they milk them?
They weren't supposed to slaughter the goats. That was part of the contract when they joined the UNICEF project. But they oftentimes didn't see the long-term impact of the goats. They will, I'm hungry now, I'm going to kill the goat and eat it. They didn't understand that what we were going to do is provide the goat milk that they would feed to the kids, and the goat would then reproduce, and then you'd have more goats. So we cleaned the goat and stopped the whole process. But they were hungry, so a lot of times they just took it.
Looks like the kids get along better in a lot of different age groups than our kids tend to segregate into.
Yeah,
ages.
definitely. And a lot of times they're all related too in a certain community because they don't leave their communities when they grow up. They just go build themselves a house and start farming land. So a lot of times these communities are very, they're all cousins or sisters and brothers, and they all hang out. Very close knit.
Would children be educated together, Sean?
Yeah, the schoolrooms. Yeah, in the bigger communities, they'd have grade levels, kind of like here, but they'd be separated out. But in the small communities that I was spending a lot of time in, they would kind of just go and learn all together.
And who does the teaching?
They actually, the Panamanian government does a really good job of providing teachers. So their education system actually isn't that deficient, so to speak. They're able to provide teachers in most communities. Which is, in every community, we do these rural workshops, like I was explaining, where we cook all this food and then we sit them down and try to disseminate knowledge about how to care for the goats, how to plant your seeds, what time of year you need to plant your seeds, and then we explain, Brian and I, what our research was. So how we want to collect data on the children. We want to interview all the project participants. So this is Dr. Carlos Renato. He's introducing the project to the community. And he's got his posters up to help really explain the whole process. And in the background, you can see the women, the mothers, oftentimes would be cooking the meal, cooking the rice and chicken.
What kind of food? Oh, I'm sorry. What kind of food did you cook?
Rice and chicken and beans and spam was really popular.
How did you assess them for the nutrient deficiencies? I mean, did you take blood urine samples or mostly observation?
It was non-invasive. As an undergraduate student,
Yeah.
it's illegal essentially for me to go take data samples of population blood samples. I have to be certified for that. So I had to go through the National Institute of Health and the Institutional Review Board at Iowa State, and that was all just so I could ask questions. And that's what all my data was based on. Brian, he went through additional training than me, so he could take anthropometric measurements. So he was doing arm circumference, height, weight, body. He's trying to calculate the body mass index of each child. So he did the skin fold, which is where you measure the amount of skin that's pulled off the body in certain areas of the child's body, and that kind of gives you an idea of percent body fat. I was fortunate enough that I was always surrounded by, I had Brian, who was a Spanish speaker, Carlos Fernandez, who was part of MEDA, and then we'd also have community extension workers with us. So wherever I went, I was with this entourage of locally trusted professionals. So the community would know most people that were walking there, and they were able to understand that if they trusted me, the community could trust me. It was a longer process though, kind of trying to get to know them, just because they were very hesitant at first.
Like the children, you said you kind of recruited children guides to help you around. I mean, in the end, did you do any type of like bartering system, or were they just openly willing to help?
They often volunteered to do it. Dr. Renaz, he knows the mountains pretty well, so we would have been fine with the children, but they just were so interested in us and wanting to help out that they often volunteered to help or lead, which is cool.
So, John, talk about this little boy. Isn't that the one that followed you around?
Yeah, this guy followed me around a lot.
Is there alcohol use?
When I was there in the Comarca, which is the community we stayed in, it's known as the most rebellious part of Panama, and they're actually trying to secede when we were there. Didn't know that until I got there. And there was this local community worker who was actually a woman who has become more or less the resistance leader. And I had to sit down and talk with her, which I thought was really cool. I didn't know it at first. This was the woman I was talking to, because she kind of has this whole myth surrounding her. She disappears into the jungle and the government can't find her. And I just started having a conversation with her, which was really cool. The week after I left that community, the La Comarca staged this huge protest against the government, where they brought in gunships and the locals shut down the Interamericana highway, and there was all this, a bunch of people got killed, and it was really intense. We weren't able to travel back to Santiago that weekend because it was all cut off. And they were protesting the state of the school system specifically, but it was more of a protest against Martinelli, who's the president of Panama, who recently was found to have laundered $300 million out of the government. So he's not even really trying to hide it at this point.
This must have been the week where we weren't getting any emails from you about what was going on.
Yeah, internet connection was shut down at that point.
Back to nutrition for a minute. Were they, in these rural areas, if they got the cookies and the Coke, now, how did they get the money for that? Was it products that they grew and sold, or were there any type of government aid that they were paid, subsistence money that they could use to buy these things? How did they buy their?
So one of the main things that my socioeconomic assessment looked at was access to the market. So how these communities were able to access the market and sell their agricultural goods and produce some sort of income. And they were able to do that. Cash crop, which is a crop that produces an income, is often maize, beans, rice.
The bananas, they wanted the bananas.
So they're able to, these subsistence farmers, they're able to produce enough for them to eat, and a lot of times they had a little bit left over to sell. And that created this income that they could then go to the market and buy these goods. It also helped out that the government provides free education, free forms of healthcare.
But no direct
welfare. Yeah, no direct stimulation.
Did you get a sense for the average lifespan in the rural areas of Panama?
So if you look at the CIA World Fact Book, the average lifespan for a male is 68 years and a female 67. It's actually not that young, but in the rural communities, it's oftentimes in the 50s and 60s, 50s to the 60s. It's not quite as bad. Like in Uganda, it was 37, 42. It's pretty low. So this is, they would slaughter chickens for us every time we got into the community as a gift. So this is a photo of Brian. He's looking at that. This is a rice paddy right here. He's helping irrigate the land. The kids loved him too because he had the patience to sit down and talk to them. And he could speak the language. This is a photo of us taking data. This is a community health worker from the Ministry of Health, and he lives in the community, so he kind of knows the people. It's easier for him to actually take the measurements and touch the kids. It wouldn't be right for us to do that. This is Tom was talking about how we played soccer with the kids when it would rain. We also taught English and nutrition classes when we had free time. So we administered tests, and you can see that they're all very smart kids because every one of them would get A's. So they were great. And the reason that there's photos of her is because she spoke really good English. I can't speak good English very well. But she spent time in the United States with her aunt and uncle, so she kind of was more well-adjusted to who we were and where we came from. Parrots, they're really cool. And this is what I was talking about earlier, how we would go to the goat farmers and pick up the goats that we would then distribute throughout Panama. Those goats were kind of butt. We'd have to load them into the back and then fence them in, and they just did not like that at all. They would fight us. But
we were talking about trying to teach the communities about having the goats reproduce. Did each family get one goat, or were they coupled with other families who received a goat of the opposite sex so they could reproduce, or how did?
So the way that the project was designed is that each community would have 5 households would get a female goat, and then every community would get a male goat. And the male goat would take turns staying in each household with a female goat. And they just did that. They just did that until they got a feel for how successful the project would be in each community. A lot of times there was a huge need for more goats, more families would be interested. In which case we would then load up more female goats and bring them to the community. This is a photo of us working. They were starting an irrigation project. So we were helping transport materials. This is just kind of the environment that I just thought this photo was really cool because I have no idea what any of these trees were called, but they just really cool.
Sean, this was a UNICEF project.
Yeah.
So what kinds of impressions did it leave you with in terms of the mission of UNICEF, the effectiveness of UNICEF?
So UNICEF, what they do mostly is they provide grants for projects. There's not a lot of on-the-ground work that they do. And in my limited experience in development, it's very clear that UNICEF knows how to run an effective program. They know what needs to be done. The locals are the ones that need to do the implementation. You can't send a guy from Boston to go tell a community how to run their lives. All the funding it's targeted towards inputs that will be sustainable, that will reproduce, such as seed, fertilizer, goats that will reproduce milk. In terms of their mission, out of the different United Nations programs, let's say UNICEF is one of the more effective institutions, just based on the amount of progress that they make on a yearly basis. Definitely.
Excuse me, and then is UNICEF totally funded by like governmental funds, or was this all kind of government funds?
So UNICEF is funded through the United Nations, which is funded through grants from member countries. So each year, UNICEF or the United Nations asks all member countries to pledge a certain amount of their GDP or a percentage of their international development. Looks like we need to be gone, but yeah, just one of those pretty chill. It's just more guys. This is a community seminar, like I showed you earlier. This is one of the, I really like this photo because it shows one of the families that we work closely with. This is a girl drinking the goat's milk. So, you can imagine. This is her grandmother. We do a lot of hiking. This is just a photo of the hikes that we did. And if you guys have ever seen Pirates of the Caribbean, we went to the places in the Caribbean where that movie is based out of. So we went to all the Spanish forts that pillaged and brought all of the gold. All the gold from South and Central America would be funneled through Panama, through these forts, and then sent through the Gulf of Mexico back to Spain. So I just thought it was really cool that we got to visit these forts, Spanish Inquisition, and all that stuff. As of recently, I've gotten really interested in health policy, specifically in research, following the line between research and development and implementation of medicine and technology. I actually just got back from a conference at Duke University, the Stanford School of Public Policy, where I got to work with students from across the country that are interested in health policy and how we can reform our current healthcare system to be more efficient, streamline it, and figure out how to provide the necessary medicine, technology, and access to healthcare to the developing world, specifically. We do have the resources to do that. It's just a matter of redefining or revamping the system. So that's what I'd like to go into. Thank you.
Presentation of your work and the ideas that were inspiring to you during the anniversary. Great, thank you so much.